Nick, we ready?
I'll do this for you, Jeffrey.
Okay.
So glad she showed up. Yeah.
Okay, good. Mayor Collins, are you wanting me to run the meeting, or are you wanting to run the meeting from where you are? I don't know where to look.
Well, I think let's go to Plan C, which is we'll tag team it. Let me call this then. If everybody's ready, let's call this meeting to order and let's stand for the flag salute.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Councilmember Redmond.
Here.
Councilmember Stacklet. Here. Councilmember Stearns.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Clure. Here. Mayor Collins.
Here. We're going to have a special presentation this evening. Jeff Knowles from Alta Planning will cover the Walk, Bike, Ride Mount Shasta Mobility Plan, which looks really interesting. Jeff, you ready to go?
I am. Greetings, members of council. My name is Jeff Knowles. I'm your consultant hired to walk through the Mount Shasta's Walk, Bike, Ride Mobility Plan. So I've got an update for you. We presented to you in the past as a joint meeting with Planning Commission, and I'm going to walk this through you real quick and get some feedback from this body. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. So the agenda tonight is to give you an overview of the project, make sure that you're up to speed with where we are, then really share with you what's exciting is we're at the phase now where we have recommendations and priorities for the city to undertake to improve the walking, biking conditions for the city. And then we'll talk about next steps, where we're going from here. So hopefully you are aware, but the city of Mount Shasta is preparing a mobility plan called Walk, Bike, Ride Mount Shasta. Through this effort, the city and its stakeholders are developing strategies around transportation improvements to foster a vibrant, sustainable community with accessible destinations between businesses and neighborhoods, schools, and your surrounding natural environment. And the core of the plan is focused on identifying and developing recommended projects for future implementation. So this is your long-term wish list of improvements, and we're going to help you phase what are the most immediate things you can get done quickly, and then what things you need to go out and find external grant sources to accomplish. So our study area and scope, it goes beyond just the city of Mount Shasta boundaries, looks kind of within your planning area. We collected data back about a year ago. We've conducted extensive community engagement, coming to do multiple events, bike rides, online outreach and surveys. We developed draft recommendations. We've shared those with the community and gotten feedback with the community and as well as a technical advisory committee. And we're at the stage now where we have got those prioritized and looking for feedback. That will be all pulled together into a draft plan, and then that will come back to this body for adoption later this fall. So the schedule, we had a couple of phases: listen and learn, where we did a lot of extensive listening to the community, gathering feedback. We then moved to building consensus over the fall, developing those projects, refined them, and now here we are kind of in the summer of 2022, where we're going to get some council review and feedback. We have a website, so if members of the public are watching and want to stay plugged in, walkbikeridemountshasta.com has everything you need to know about the project to date. So our recommendations. We broke up the recommendations into three different categories. The first are sidewalk recommendations. And then we looked at crossings or intersection improvements, again, geared towards people walking. And then finally, we have bikeway recommendations. So the first one, the sidewalk recommendations, we looked at all the sidewalk gaps in the study area, really in the core of Mount Shasta. And we made recommendations that focused on getting people to key community destinations. And so it's not for every single gap in the network. The city just won't have the resources to do that on their own. But really, we wanted to focus strategically about what are the areas that make the most sense. So we looked at those and made recommendations. Those are shown in red here. And then we prioritized them, knowing that resources are scarce. And so we wanted to make sure what are the biggest bang for your buck. And those filling in the gaps are located on Mount Shasta Boulevard to the north and to the south, on Lake Street, on Rockefeller Drive. There's a small gap near Shastese Park, Alma Street, and Jesse Street. I'm going to move through the presentation, then we can come back for any questions you may have. In terms of spot improvements, we looked at 46 different intersection improvements, and some of those recommendations include new or upgraded crosswalk markings, like you can see here in the bottom left, crossing beacons. This is a rapid flashing beacon where a pedestrian will turn a button on and it'll flash a beacon so that motorists know to yield. Curb extensions, so reducing the time or the space that people need to cross the crosswalk, and then adding new ADA accessible curb ramps where there are none, or where there are ones that need to be upgraded. So we looked at all those different opportunities and categorized them across the city with 46. We then prioritized them. And with the spot improvements and with the bikeway recommendations, we broke everything down into 4 different buckets for you. The first are your high priority projects. These are the ones that have a lot of impact. Maybe they're near a school or they're at a location that has a history of collisions and have a safety issue. So a lot of impact if you made investments there, but low cost. So these are the ones that we should say, do now. Then you have long-term projects. These are ones that also have a very high impact, but maybe they need additional engineering design or need additional grant funding sources because they're costly. The second or the third opportunity, or the third bucket, is the opportunity projects. These are ones that have potentially a lower impact, but they're low cost. So maybe you wrap them together when you're resurfacing a road or when a development is happening. They're ones that if there's an opportunity to bundle it together, it's a good project. And then there are low priority projects, the ones that are lower impact and high cost. The 3 high priority spot improvement locations that came out of this process were Mount Shasta Boulevard and Smith Street. It's upgrading a crosswalk to high visibility crosswalk, which is more that ladder style. You can see that in the image here. This is what we call a high visibility crosswalk, with advanced pedestrian yield markings and additional signage at that location. The next high priority location is at Hatchery Lane and the I-5 on-ramp. It's adding 1 high visibility crosswalk across the ramp. And then number 24 on our map is Pine and Castle. It's adding a crosswalk on Castle. So we have 3 of those high priority project locations, low cost but high impact. And then we've got about a dozen or so long-term projects that will be perfect for grant applications that the city can pursue. In terms of bikeway recommendations, there's a lot of different styles or classifications for bikeways. There are class 1 shared use paths. These are trails that pedestrians and people walking can use. Then there are your typical bicycle lanes, just a stripe of paint that separates bicyclists from motor vehicle traffic. And then there's what we call class 3, or your bicycle boulevards. These are streets where typically on low volume residential streets where people feel comfortable mixing with traffic. There's not a dedicated space for it, but typically the car is not moving too fast and there are not too many of them there. You can also introduce some traffic calming treatments to further make it feel more comfortable for people bicycling on these streets. And this is an example of what that could look like. This is an example of a neighborhood traffic circle, but there also could be things like speed bumps or curb extensions, again, to get people to slow down. And so the map on the right looks like a bunch of spaghetti here, but in blue, you see the bicycle lanes, and in purple are the bicycle boulevards, and in green are your shared use paths. We also have a new category. This was not included in the last time that the city had a bicycle and pedestrian plan. It's a relatively new treatment. It's called a separated bikeway. And these are catching on because unlike a typical bikeway, there's physical separation between the bicyclists and motor vehicle traffic. And you can see here, this is an example from Modesto, where there are parked cars and these curb stops that separate vehicle traffic from the bicycle way. And so these are called separated bikeways. And we've got two major corridors that I wanted to point out for you. One is on Mount Shasta Boulevard, and then what we're calling the Crosstown Corridor, which is located on Lassen Lane, Pine, Alma, and Rockfellow. So we're kind of a north-south and east-west. And these are really to connect most of your schools through the core, the heart of Mount Shasta. And we've looked at these as different opportunities for how you do this with snow removal and snow storage, and also with those key priority destinations that people want to get to. What we heard from the public was that they felt most comfortable when there was some sort of physical barrier between them and motor vehicle traffic. So if you want to get more people out of their cars, doing more sustainable transportation, this is a type of facility that more people are, comfortable with. We also looked at neighborhood connectors, understanding that fire resiliency and access is important. And so we did an entire analysis of the entire study area, looking at areas that didn't have multiple points of egress in their neighborhoods. And so those cul-de-sac streets, we looked at opportunities to connect them together. When there's not an emergency, this is good for just neighborhood connectivity, people walking to visit their neighbors or bicycling, so they don't have to go out of their way to get in and out of neighborhoods. They can go through these neighborhood connectors, but also provides emergency vehicle access in the future. So we identified 10 of these neighborhood connectors. You can see these are shown in brown on the map. And so again, we prioritize those looking at your high priority projects, low cost, but high impact. And those would be trail studies, looking at opportunities for trails. We looked at also the ones that only involve paint. So bicycle lanes or your bicycle boulevards that may or may not need additional traffic calming. And so those are here with kind of bolded in the shadow, and I'll pull those out in a second here. And these are what we're calling your high priority projects, the ones that if you have the ability to do now, these are the network that we think the city should pursue. And so for trail studies, the first one is the Great Shasta Rail Trail. It's taking over some abandoned railroad that goes from really from I-5 and Mount Shasta Boulevard across all the way down to McLeod is the alignment. And then from there, there's an existing envisioned trail that goes on another 30 or 40 miles on an abandoned railroad track. And so connecting into Mount Shasta would be this nice recreational connection. And so that one is studying that, looking at the ownership of that, and seeing what the cost would be for the city to take that over, or for maybe a nonprofit to take that over. The other one is what we're calling the Headwaters to Lake Trail, and that has come directly out of the Parks and Recs District's Trails and Parks Master Plan. And that's connecting what we call the headwaters all the way down to Lake Siskiyou. So that has gone in various stages of development right now. And so this would be to formalize what are the easements needed, what would the cost be, and kind of how you prioritize each of these segments. Then we have these bike boulevards, the Midtown Greenway, Mill Maple Bikeway. Those are bicycle boulevards, so on low volume residential streets. And these would provide nice alternatives to people bicycling on Mount Shasta Boulevard. And then you got new bike lanes to add on Washington Drive and the Gateway Trail Connector, which we're calling kind of the extension all the way up north on Everett Memorial. And then for east-west, bike lanes to be added on Lake Street and on Ream Avenue. Some other things that we looked at as part of this study were this one-way analysis of converting Mount Shasta Boulevard and Chestnut to a one-way couplet. And so we looked at the traffic volumes and modeled them, and I want to share with you some of the results that we found. So we looked at Mount Shasta Boulevard, Chestnut. Our kind of a study area was thinking about a one-way street from 1 block south of Lake Street at the current intersection all the way to the north 6 blocks north of Lake Street. So kind of a small pair there. We looked at a series of peak hour traffic counts. We conducted that a few months ago at 6 key intersections. And then we also adjusted them to summertime counts that we'd also collected in the past. So we wanted to really emulate a really busy day, kind of around the 4th of July for y'all. So we could evaluate the highest traffic activity for the season. What we know is that Mount Shasta Boulevard carries 73% of the total traffic between the two pairs, and then Chestnut Street carries about a quarter of the traffic. We looked at traffic delay, which is congestion. What would happen if you if you created this one-way scenario, what would happen to people getting stuck in traffic? And so what I want to draw attention to, I got my pointer here, is the one-way scenario, this table here. You can see what we've modeled here is delay seconds per vehicle versus your existing conditions, and then your level of service. This is kind of a A through F scale. And for the city of Mount Shasta, as part of your general plan, you're trying to keep most of your intersections to a LOS C or better. And so you can see there would be some impact. Obviously at Lake Street and Chestnut Street, you'd almost double your delay. You go from a C to an E. At Mount Shasta Boulevard and Lake, you'd go pretty much keep it at a B. It would be no major impact there. At Lake and Maple Street, additional 10 seconds. And at Mount Shasta Boulevard and Alma Street, a very minimal delay. And so we also looked at some mitigation measures to say, all right, what else could you do? And so we proposed a couple of things of changing a northbound left turn lane to add 2 different lanes, adding a traffic signal, potentially adding a couple different configurations would help mitigate that delay. But on the whole, I guess the takeaway really is that if the city went ahead and pursued a one-way couplet, you would not see a significant change in terms of delay or congestion. And there's ways to mitigate that as well. The largest volume would be along the Mount Shasta Boulevard, just south of Lake Street, with a reduction in volumes. All right, so you go from about 2,300 vehicles per day, and just north of Lake Street, Mount Shasta Boulevard volume would drop by 1,900 vehicles per day, and they would move over to Chestnut, which would increase by 1,100 vehicles per day. And there would be some impacts to some side streets, so I just wanted to make sure that's clear to council. What we're seeing is probably a 700 additional vehicles per day on Mount Shasta Boulevard to Chestnut Street, and Mill Street would see an increase of around 1,300 vehicles per day. So some things that were also included in our analysis is that, this one-way street could arguably be safer for pedestrian crossings if we keep it to one travel lane on Mount Shasta Boulevard and one travel lane on Chestnut Street. If you open up to 2 travel lanes, then we've seen an issue where pedestrians are more frequently, the victims of collisions because people can go much faster through your one-way street. So we really recommend keeping it to one way. What that does, though, is it opens up the opportunity for new street uses. So you could think about increasing parking from on-street parallel parking to angled parking. You could have more space for your parklets, for restaurants. You could have more space for those class 4 separated bikeways that I presented before. What else? One-way streets can slightly increase emergency response times as vehicles may need to circle the block. So it's something that the city needs to consider. There also might be additional sign clutter with no one-way streets. A lot of more signs need to let people know about the one-way streets or the do not enter signs. And the other thing is just commercial corridor strategies, right? If the idea here is to increase commercial activity on Chestnut Street, we feel this strategy alone is going to be insufficient. And so the city really needs to consider architecture and design policies that support building setbacks, ground floor retail, the mix of uses that you see like on Mount Shasta Boulevard, pedestrian amenities like benches and beautification and lighting, and maybe signage. So all this needs to be taken together in account if you want to see more people visiting and patronizing businesses on Chestnut Street. So I've gone through a lot. There's other recommendations also that'll be coming in the draft plan, going into more detail about the trail studies, promoting wayfinding, sidewalk gap infill policy for all of those gaps that happen in residential areas. We want to create or recommend a policy for how to deal with that. Maybe at the point of sale when people sell their homes, that's a good time to fill in those sidewalk gaps. We'll be making recommendations about transit stop amenities, so making it more comfortable for people that need to stop or use transit. And then your implementation timeline and strategies, where to go after grants, who's got the grants, and when you should go after them. So we'll be putting that into the plan. So next steps, we're going to be revising priority recommendations based off the feedback we get tonight from council and also from the technical advisory committee. We'll be developing a draft plan and collecting feedback on that as well. And then coming back into October, hopefully at that time to present this draft plan to council for your review and hopeful adoption. So with that, I just want to flash this back up on the screen for members of the public. The website is walkbikeridemountshasta.com. You can send us an email at info@walkbikeridemountshasta.com, or you can leave us a voicemail message if you prefer. 530-230-3220 is our voicemail message number. With that, I'd like to turn things over to council to get any questions you have or collect any feedback you have for me.
Kathy, we got any questions coming in?
No.
And I have a question as well.
We actually do have a hand raised. I didn't know if we were taking public comment.
Councilmember Stearns?
Do you want to ask clarifying questions first?
Please. There's no reference that I saw in terms of roundabouts or traffic circles, and some were suggested by citizens at various locations. Is there an intent to include a discussion about that in the transportation study?
A great question. Those were included in those spot improvements. Some of those are specifically roundabout location recommendations. They're high cost, and so that's why they're not high priority. So they're more of your long-term recommendations.
To the chair.
Yes.
I'm a big fan of the one-way street concept, have been for years, so this is exciting to see some momentum going. I have heard throughout the years that one of the issues maybe swaying against this was that Chestnut Street may not handle as much weight as Mount Shasta Boulevard, and I was wondering if our Public Works Director has been involved in these conversations for some more logistical things outside of this study that we could bring this together, perhaps. No?
I don't have an answer to that, but we did rebuild Chestnut Street, a complete rebuild, and I would think that would meet the...
That alleviates that concern?
Right.
Great. That's
That
all.
would be my guess, not my definitive answer.
For my part, we did not evaluate the current conditions of the street, just the traffic volumes and congestion.
Okay, so following in on that question, yeah, there's a lot of interest in the one-way street concept for that couplet that you studied. Do you have any idea what it would cost to make all the necessary changes, whether it's bump outs, signage, et cetera, for that amount of mileage?
We didn't have come up with a concept plan because of all of the different variations. You would really want to go through a public process to figure out all the different options you have once you go through one way. But we could come up with a ballpark figure and put that into the plan if that would be helpful. Maybe a range of different costs.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Sorry, one more. The one-way street is based on one lane, correct? Not multi-lanes, which would account for more parking and snow removal issues and all of that, correct?
Yes, that's correct, Councilmember. Our analysis was predicated on the assumption that it'd just be one travel lane on Mount Shasta Boulevard, as you have today, in each direction. So
Right.
keeping one direction on Mount Shasta and one direction on Shasta.
Thank you.
Kathy, anybody else?
Can I ask a quick question?
Kathy, you're going to have to speak up. I can't hear you.
Mayor Collins, we were just doing clarifying questions now, and then we need to formally open up to public comment, I think.
For a special presentation, open up to public comment?
We've got public comment next, but it's up to you guys whether you want public comment as part of this.
City manager had a question, however.
So my question for you, Jeff, is this. Whether the city likes the concept of moving to a couplet, what is your take on this configuration in terms of a tool to activate Chestnut Street?
It's a good question, and I think that my suggestion would be it's a pretty radical departure from your current conditions, and I think it would need to go hand in hand with some other strategies that I talked about to be effective, right? I think just the one-way couplet alone is not going to see significant change in, I think, a lot of commercial activity without the things that I mentioned before, without looking at the urban design aspect. There's a lot about Mount Shasta Boulevard, kind of in the bones of the street, that make it feel really inviting for people to walk and shop and linger and spend money. And I know, as being a tourist, I brought my family, and my parents flew in from Texas, and we were there a couple of weeks ago, and my mom spent hours walking up and down Mount Shasta Boulevard. I think that if there was wayfinding and signage and a good mixture of retail that kind of had the same street facade, if all that were into play, I think you could see people really gravitating and spending money on Chestnut Street. I think the one-way alone may be an expensive endeavor to get this kind of outcome in terms of activating the space. So I think it's a good strategy if it is in part of a bigger kind of a Main Street strategy for Chestnut.
Kathy, we're going to go to, let's go to have public comment here. We'll do it again generally, but if anybody wants to comment on this presentation, do we have anybody in the audience? Because I can't see anything.
Looks like we have a couple hands, yeah.
Well, Kathy, invite them up.
Okay, let's go ahead and take care of our online comment first, and that will be Johanna. Johanna, can you please unmute your mic?
Oh, there we go. There we go. Now it let me do it. Sorry about that. The little sign didn't come up. Can you hear me?
Not very well.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So I just want to say I'm really excited about this project and all the data that they found. I like the traffic circles. I like the one-way streets. It does seem like it might need more like part of a bigger project, like he was saying. But I mean, it seems like there's some possibilities there. I just wanted to ask: is it possible that if there's going to be any of these changes done to make it a quieter experience for people to repave, to add the quieter asphalt on top of some of the chip seal? And the other thing was for the emergency access came up, and one of the things that I think we're lacking is an underpass at Alma from like Pine Street up to Mount Shasta Boulevard. And that would also aid with recreation because we have a lot of trains that come by. And if there were an emergency, you could have a train that's stalled on the tracks that's blocking the road. And then regarding the sidewalk issues, you were talking about doing that at the time of sale. I'd like to just point out that most of the sidewalk issues, at least the ones that I have, they come from snow plows and perhaps from the USPS delivery trucks. And so I think maybe that needs to be a little bit more of a shared, I don't know how that's going to work, but I think that needs to be taken into consideration. So, and that's all. And overall, I think this is really exciting to have trails from, throughout the city and whatnot. So anyway, thank you.
Kathy, who's next?
We'll go ahead and take the members in the audience now.
Hello, good evening. My name is Tracy J. Costello. I've been up here for over 25 years. I've watched people come and go. I mostly stayed in Dunsmuir but I've been up here for over 5 years. When I've seen some councils come and go, Tim's here. I've had conversations with Tim, and I've made suggestions to this organization that handles the transportation study and conclusions and all that you're being presented with. I've had conversations with them and Tim about a dial-a-ride for seniors or anybody that needs a ride that may be too buzzed to drive or to walk. I mean, I'm a kid, that's a joke, okay, Robert? But anyway, people need a dollar ride. Seniors, you know, where I come from, my mother lived La Mirada, California, population where it was 27,000, but they had a deal where you could dial the number, they could, and they would come, you give them 50, at that time, it was, you know, it was 15, 20 years ago, it was 50 cents to take you across town. When you're done with your business, you call them back and get a ride back to wherever you were within city limits. That's what I talked to Tim about. That's what I advocated with the transportation staff. And I see it's been totally omitted from the study, and we're talking about all kinds of projects like one-way streets. I've never, ever, ever heard of a worse idea than to change Chestnut backwards. You've already got a lot of business there along Chestnut, and also, yes, of course, along Mount Shasta, but we've got logging trucks that got to get through town. I'm not an advocate of logging, particularly the headwaters, everywhere like that, but logging still happens, and those trucks like to tool through town, see what they can spot as they go through town. But 102, try Brewer 102. Anyway, I see my time is more than allowed, but I've talked to Kathy. Kathy knows me. That's Kathy there, right? No, yeah, I'm glad to see you. Anyway, yeah, I'm totally against the one-way street. We need a dollar ride for seniors and people. It doesn't have to be 50 cents. Could be a couple, $3. The cabs are way too much. We're paying $10, $15 to go down to raise 5 blocks to get a $2 quart of milk. A lot of seniors can't afford that. We've got fixed income seniors. The seniors are the backbone of Mount Shasta. Many of them have a lot of money in the bank and investments, and the property they own is worth a lot. We need to address housing in this town. I was told we would discuss housing, the housing element in this today, and I hope that gets done. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Kathy, who's next?
Therese Swenson, did you want to speak?
Kathy was next. Okay, so this questioning was open about...
Would you give me your name, please?
Presentation, so that was what I was responding to. Hi, I'm Therese Swenson. So about the streets, I know there's a lot of people and it's popular for the one-way, but one of the things I heard him say was, so we'll be turning in these papers to you back and forth and getting your opinions, and then we're going to present something to you in October for to have it reviewed and approved. So I'm just concerned that the time would only be 6 or 8 weeks of reviewing this, and I'm asking you if it's going to be put before all the public for them to have input. Because right now I'm not sure everybody knows. People have talked about it for years, but I'm not sure everybody knows that you're on calendar to make a decision. So I'd like very much to make the public aware of this for any input they might have. That's in regards to what this gentleman was doing, but that's not why I'm here tonight, so I'm in conflict. Should I talk about my other issue in 30 seconds or less? Okay, thanks.
Sure. Or not.
We'll hold off for regular public comment on her other comment.
Okay.
Not related to this item.
Thanks, Kathy.
And we have one more remote commenter, and that will be Nyon.
Hello, Council. I'm hoping that you guys can hear.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Great, great. As you guys know, I'm Nyan. I'm with the Lewis Thrive Bar. We did our best to do our part on upgrading Chestnut Street as far as the facade goes. I was listening to the comments in regards to just doing the cutlet versus upgrading the facade. What I believe is in market forces, and that if you build it, they will come. If you make Chestnut Street one way and Mount Shasta one way, you're going to have the entrepreneurs and the business owners wanting to upgrade due to the increase of traffic and wanting to make Chestnut a better place and more friendly, walkable place. They're going to upgrade their facades. They're going to upgrade the quality of products that they sell, and they're going to do a much better job at keeping the Chestnut Street active and fun. So I'm thoroughly for this, and I'd love to be part of the debate going forward. Because if you look at Ashland, you look at Tahoe, you look at places on Maui, any place that has a high tourism volume has one-way streets in the downtown district. And that's not by mistake. So it's really, what we're seeing in Mount Shasta right now is an influx of tourism that we've never seen before. We're seeing radical upgrades of facades of buildings and restaurants and all the tourism related stuff, such as the Summit Lofts, or such as our place, or such as Pipeline and Sparky's and all of that. Like you're seeing major renovations, and what's going to happen is you're going to get an influx of tourists all of a sudden. And the right time to do these improvements was 5 years ago. The second best time to do it would be right now, because it's coming, and if we're not set up for it, it's going to be a total disaster, and then we'll lose that opportunity for good. And we were talking about logging a minute ago. Logging, is we know that industry is dying out. So we know that tourism is growing, and so we got to play the hands that we're dealt with. And so I really encourage the council to take a very strong look at doing one-way streets. And believe me, you guys don't need to worry about the facade of the real estate on the sides of the road. You guys just change the directions, put in the new signage and new parking spaces, and the business owners will do the rest. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyan. Kathy, anybody else?
We don't have any other hands raised. We do have one member of the audience that would like to speak.
Hello, my name is Thea Kowski, and I am here to address number 12 on your agenda this evening.
I'm sorry, the public comment for that item will occur during item number 12.
Really?
Yeah, this is specifically regarding the walk, bike, ride mobility plan.
All righty.
Sorry about that, Thea. Well, if that's anybody else, Kathy?
There are no other hands raised.
Well, again, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your time and clarity with this presentation. Look forward to getting the public input and moving forward. So we will. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry to interject. I want to make one thing I think clear, just so there's not confusion about the one-way couplet and the timing. I thought that was a really good question, and I might have muddied the waters there. Council does not need to make a decision about the one-way couplet as part of this citywide plan. It's one element of the citywide plan that we're providing information and making a recommendation, but that's something the city council can undertake at a later date with the information that's included in this plan. So I think there was a member of the public, and I'm sure others that are maybe saw this and are interested in this topic, but it's not our intention that needs to be decided as part of the adoption of this plan.
Great. Thank you very much. We will move on to agenda item number 4 with public comment in general, other than agendized items. Kathy, who do we have?
It looks like it.
I'm at tag. Okay. Hi. I've brought this up before in the past. My concern about the structures.
Would you give us your name, please?
Oh, hi. I'm Therese Swenson. Well, who am I talking to?
I'm that.
Oh, it's this person?
That big mug on the screen.
Oh, I'm Therese Swenson.
Hi.
And what's your first name?
Jeffrey.
Oh, okay, thanks. So, a few years ago, we had COVID come into our town and shut down a lot of our businesses. And we were creative about building these outdoor structures, which I asked about, and I was told it was a temporary variance. And the following year, I was told it was renewed. And then this year, when I asked about it, because now all the businesses are open, I received a letter from Jeffrey. Is that you, the person that I'm talking to on the up here? Is that the person that wrote me this letter? Okay. So I received this letter in response when I asked about that variance, that it keeps getting renewed. Because my concern, if I wanted to put a business on Mount Shasta Boulevard, I would have to go through architectural reviews and safety and fire and I don't know, all the things. I was trying to find my old letter, but I have one I'm going to read in the last minute. But what Jeffrey Collings wrote back to me is, "Hi, Therese. I read your letters. I am the mayor. The wood structures on Mount Shasta Boulevard are perfectly legal. There is no fire concern. There are no parking concerns. This will not be on our agenda. Thank you for your input." So I wrote a letter to Kathy to ask about getting this to be an agenda item, and I included pictures to be passed around today. I was hoping they could be on the overhead and shared with the Zoom people. One picture clearly shows, I think they could put it in front of the camera. One picture clearly shows the structures blocking the bike lane, which we're just talking about making this place advertised as more bike friendly. So it's a problem when the bikes come up. It's a conflict for the traffic getting around these structures. But that's not my main concern. There's another one that shows that it obscures John Thomas Jewelry. He had his architectural review for a gorgeous building and you can't see it. There's a market you can't see, you don't know it's there. These structures were temporary variants. My issue is about fire. Every year, CAL FIRE does an evacuation plan which looks at all the arteries to move traffic up and back. I have often said that I don't care about people eating on other than the main street. I think it's a mistake to block that street. We need to be able to go either direction in a moment's notice and move 200 people from Castella, do the math, 1,500 from Dunsmuir, 5,000 from Mount Shasta. There might be 250 people at the lake. We need to think about how many people have more than one car and that they might be driving through and have to remove 2 cars for an evacuation. So I've been bringing this up because I am concerned about, there's 10 other businesses on Mount Shasta Boulevard that could ask for a variance. They could put out tables and chairs in their parking spaces. I think that there's 15 restaurants that have outdoor seating on private property. I have no problem with eating outdoors. My concern has been every year about traffic flow through Mount Shasta in the event of evacuation. There could be a problem on the freeway. We need all arteries clear and not permanent structures. And I'm concerned about this, and I've brought it up, and I'm bringing it up again, asking it to be an agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Kathy, is there anyone else who would like to speak?
There are no other hands raised.
Okay, let's go on to council and staff comments. City manager, do you want anything to lead off with?
So I wanted to give an update on the Crystal Geyser and Orchard property annexation. You know, I plan to bring that back this time with a resolution in support of the annexation. And in talking to John Kenny, you know, and I agreed that until we fill out the applications for each of the APNs or parcel numbers, which there are 16 involved, and there are almost 100-page applications for each and involve the need for a planner, that passing a resolution would just act as a window dressing, and that we should probably bring the annexation resolution back once we have each one of these applications complete. So they're in the works, and you know, as soon as we're able to get all these applications done, we'll bring you know, the full applications and the resolution back.
Thank you, Todd. Anybody else? Boy, this is hard doing it when I can't see anybody.
Just real quick, I want to let everybody know that we have had officers assigned to the McKinney fire since the first day. Just updating council that we have participated, and we're going to continue to have officers, I believe, through the 16th scheduled out, or until they're no longer requested. Right now, the fire's moved more towards the Happy Camp area, and they've got another, and that's the big concern. So they're continuing with the local law enforcement requests now.
And if I can add one more thing, there's a resignation on the beautification committee. There are now 2 empty slots, so folks that may be interested, this is the time to get your applications in if you're interested in being on that committee.
Councilors, any comments?
Yeah, through the chair. I want to speak to the Library Expansion Advisory Committee that was formed several weeks ago. As it stands, Tessa and I are on that committee. Tessa went to a Friends of the Library meeting. If she wants to expand on that, she can, but I believe she thinks the 2 people volunteered to be part of the committee.
It's in the process of.
It's in the process of, okay. So we were supposed to have two people volunteer from LTAC. So I guess city manager, if you would have to help with that, get someone, okay. And then someone from the general public. So I guess Kathy, you would have to.
I can speak to that real briefly if you
Okay.
like. Oh, we already have 2 members of LTAC that have volunteered.
Okay.
One friend of the library, and I'm waiting on a second application. And we have advertised for the member at large and have not received any applications.
Okay.
Sorry, just on that piece, the Friends of the Library members were confused as to whether they can designate their executive director, Courtney, as one of the friends, even though she's not technically a board member, or if she would be considered one of the applicants for the public. And I said I didn't know.
I already told her I thought that would be a conflict of interest.
That sounds like it smacks of a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
Okay.
Should be advising on. Yeah. So anyhow, I was hoping that we could have our first meeting in October. Would the numbers on fiscal 2022 be complete by October, you think, Muriel? So we'd know where the library stands. Okay, so I guess it's pending more applicants. All right, very good.
And I had a question on that. If Evelyn Callis was one of the members that was going to be on, and she was wondering about timing, if it's going to be a quarterly meeting and that sort of logistic.
I did respond to her, and I let her know that all of that would be determined by the committee once you guys got together and had a meeting.
Thank you. And then my other question is, at a previous meeting, we decided that I would be the voting delegate when we go down to the Long Beach League of Cities. Have we been notified on what we're voting on? And don't we have to vote before the vote?
Yes, not yet. I haven't received the resolutions, but I'll bring them before council as soon as I get them.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We'll move on to agenda item number 6, committee updates. Todd, any information here?
We've had no committees meet. We had DIAC meet before the last city council meeting. So I don't know when the next is scheduled, but I don't have anything to report.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to the consent agenda. First of all, well, let me go ahead and read it. The city manager recommends approval of the following consent agenda items. All resolutions and ordinances on this agenda or added hereto shall be introduced or adopted as applicable by title only, and the full reading thereof is hereby waived. A is approval of the minutes on July 25th, 2022 for the regular city council meeting. B is approval of disbursements for accounts payable July 27th and August 2nd, 2022, and the total gross payroll and taxes for the period ending July 24th, 2022. C is the biennial conflict of interest code review report. And D is the approval of contract with Matrix Consulting for the police and fire consolidation study. So first, does anybody want to deal with any of these issues separately? I can't see. I'm gonna take that as a no.
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 Okay, so I'll move to approve consent agenda items A through D by title only.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
It looks like there are 2 or 3 people here in the audience who are waiting for Agenda 12. Might we take that out of order in courtesy to them?
How's the rest of the council okay with that? Anybody got a problem with that? Well, then let's jump on to agenda item number 12, discussion possible action, possible reconsideration of the Chamber of Commerce digital marketing funding request. City Manager, would you introduce this, please?
Sorry to interrupt. Is it possible that since this is a reconsideration that we can first vote to even reconsider before we dive in?
Well, that's above my pay grade, Tessa.
I believe that's the protocol for a reconsideration vote.
Actually,
Yeah, Kathy, please tell me, because I don't know how this works.
So actually, talking to the city attorney, there are 2 things that need to happen. One is a vote on whether 2/3 of the council want to rehear the issue, and if they do, then we'll open it up for discussion.
Great. So then I will make a motion to not reconsider this agenda item. And this will be a little confusing on the lingo, but I would suggest that a yes vote means we do not reconsider.
Do you, just as point of order, do you want to allow Councilman Stearns, a minute or 2 to explain why he wants to reconsider?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No.
Second.
all right, there's discussion because there is a motion on the floor. Through the chair, I wish to discuss the motion.
Tim, if you'd be so kind as to be relatively brief about this or focused.
Certainly. When we voted at the last meeting, it was my understanding, and I think understanding of other council members, that that the chamber had come to us asking us to approve funding for their project, a project that they had approved, that the board of directors had approved. Afterwards, we learned that that was not the case, that the chamber board had not voted on this.
That's incorrect.
Excuse me. I have the floor. Had not voted for this project. They had approved a project that was covering the period from April to July of this year, not going forward. There are no minutes, apparently, of any Mount Shasta Chamber of Commerce board vote on this to ask the city to approve the project. That's number one. Number two, we need to be clear as to who the contracting parties are. Kevin Flynn indicated that this is not a chamber project. If it's not a chamber project, then the contracting parties would be between the city of Mount Shasta and Josh Thomas. If it is a chamber project, or to be a chamber project, then the board of directors of the chamber would have to adopt a motion or resolution and the contracting parties would then be the chamber and Josh Thomas, with some sort of agreement between Mount Shasta and the chamber. Those issues are unclear at this point. It's a reason to revisit. In addition, I think our city manager has suggested a revisiting of this matter to clarify what the duties, responsibilities, parties, etc. Can be. So that is the reason to revisit this matter. At this point, it's not clear to
Mr. Mayor, this
the
is, can we
the
move on,
visitor
please?
center, it's not clear to the city, and it's not clear to the chamber as to who the contracting parties are.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table.
Is there any other discussion? City
So,
manager, do you have any input on this?
So again, Mr. Mayor, the point of a reconsideration vote is to vote before we hear any of this. So to me, this is a giant waste of all of our time. We've already voted, we've already said yes. We're even stretching it to move this reconsideration vote to another meeting. It's supposed to happen simultaneously on that same meeting. So we need to vote before we go into discussion.
There is always discussion, always the right of discussion on any motion, including a motion for reconsideration.
We hear the
So if-
reconsideration following if we want to hear the consideration.
There is,
Kathy, you're going to have to help me here because I do not know.
Mayor Pro Tem Kluwer is correct. You would have to vote to actually reconsider the item before you hear all of the details about the item again. Councilmember Stearns has given his reasonings for wanting the reconsideration, and now would be the appropriate time to vote whether or not you want to reconsider it.
Thank you. Then vote we shall. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
no.
Okey doke. Thank you. Well, Tessa, help me out here.
So the reconsideration did not pass, therefore the 5-0 vote from the last meeting stands.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Mayor Collins, I did not get your vote on that one.
Yes,
Thank you.
I think.
May I now ask for clarification? Who are the contracting parties that will enter into the
Didn't we end
contract?
this? Aren't we moving on to the next agenda item? This is over. We've just voted on it, Tim. We're moving on to the next agenda item.
I'm not asking for reconsideration, I am asking for clarification.
Well, look at the notes from 2 weeks ago.
Excuse me, I'm not asking for Councilman Redmond to be rude either.
Folks, please.
Shut up already.
Please, hold on here, folks. Hold on. Councilmember Stearns, I will make sure I sit down with Kathy and the city manager and make sure that you get clear on who the contract parties are between. You have my commitment to do that. And it is time to move on to the next agenda item. Which I guess, Kathy, is it correct that we moved on because anybody was going to speak on it? We didn't actually kind of go into it. So is it correct to have no public comment on that agenda item?
Yes.
Yeah. I didn't know.
That one I'm not clear on because the
Right.
agenda item was to consider the reconsideration. So if somebody wanted to speak on the reconsideration, they could, but it wouldn't be a comment on the agreement with the chamber.
Yeah. Well, we've already voted on it, so if we didn't do that right, I apologize. So going back to the consent agenda, we passed that 8, public hearing, special fire assessment
We
tax.
already did that, Jeffrey.
No, we
We're on
didn't.
number 8.
Yeah, the special fire assessment tax, Measure A. Muriel,
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, as has been since 1994, we have a special fire assessment assessed on all of the properties within the city of Mount Shasta based on unimproved parcels, improved parcels, and commercial parcels. That tax has been assessed since 1994. We revisit it every year. The tax assessments are in the consent agenda. People of the public are now given the opportunity to come before council in a public hearing to discuss whether or not they believe that the assessment is still valid, and that would be their chance to talk about it at this point. So we would need to open this up to public comment anyway, that's what we need to do.
And so shall it be. Kathy?
It's
Does
actually
anybody
a
want
public hearing.
So clarifying questions from council if there are any? No. So then go ahead and open the public hearing.
Mr. Mayor, are you opening the public hearing at this time?
I thought Kathy just did. But if not, we're opening up a public hearing at this time. Kathy, is anybody who wants to speak online or in person?
We do have one hand raised, Peggy Risch.
Hi, Peggy.
Hi, I'm Peggy Risch, and I'm just looking at my property assessment here. And for this measure, it's $24, and I have to say, I am totally in support of renewing Measure A. I think it's the time of lots of fire. Well, there's lots of fires, so yes, I'm in support of it. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Peggy. Any other hands raised? Kathy? Yeah, Kathy, I can't hear you.
We do have one more public comment.
Got one last comment on this one. This is the fire tax assessment. I support all kinds of taxes. I'm the tax man. I'm not sure if you remember that Beatles song, The Tax Man.
Give them your name.
Is this Tracy?
Yeah, it's Tracy.
Give them your name again, Tracy.
Oh, sorry.
He can't see.
Tracy J. Costello, 107 North C Street. C is in the word Caterpillar, Mount Shasta, 96067-2409. Okay, anyway, yeah, I support the fire tax. That's a good investment. I supported the state fire tax that we had years back. I'm not sure if Tim remembers that one. It was a state fire tax on all the land in the North State. No matter what you own, you're going to pay $100 or $200 a year on that. And that was going to get us, that was a good, I think, Kathy, I'm sure Kathy would agree, that's a good contingency considering what we're up against for wildfires. But State Senator Brian Dowley, and he was an assemblyman then, and he rode the charade, let's get rid of it, let's get rid of it. Well, now he's at it again, trying to become our governor. I just hope he gets it right this time. Thank you. We need the fire tax. We need the state fire fee. These fires are not to be messed with. They're not to be underestimated. Thank you. And we're talking about real property here in town. As you know, building costs have skyrocketed. I know an insurance agent, we're talking $200 to $300 a square foot now. And that's amazing amount. So anyway, so yes, we need protection from fire. Thank you. At all costs. Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Kathy, anybody else?
We don't have any other hands raised.
Then I will close the public comment portion of this. And Muriel, do we turn it back to you, or is it time for a vote?
It's a public hearing, Mayor, and it's back to you for a vote.
Nope.
Do I hear a motion?
I'll move to adopt resolution CCR-22-24, resolution of the City Council of the City of Mount Shasta authorizing the special assessments for the fire department equipment funding special tax for the 2022-23 tax roll and authorizing the mayor to execute the certification by title only.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item number 9. Introduction to Mount Shasta's Housing Element Workshop. City Manager, would you tee this up for us, please?
Sure. We have Plan West partners who I've been working on the initial stages of the housing element, and they are going to present the steps and process towards completing the housing element, as well as getting into some of the regulations that have been adopted by the state that are going to impact this element. So with that said, we'll let Plan West present.
Thank you, folks. Vanessa, you going to lead off?
I am. Thanks for having us.
Appreciate you being here.
For the time, I realize you have a full agenda, so we will. We are just launching into the public outreach part of the housing element, and so this is just to provide everyone, the council and everyone else who happens to be watching, an introduction to what the housing element is, what's in it, and then what these steps are moving forward. So I'm here with Michelle Nielsen, and I'm going to ask her to share her screen and pull up our presentation. And Michelle, I see your doubles. If you want to swap the display, looks like, there you go. Great, thanks. And next slide. And so I am Vanessa Blodgett, a principal with Plan West Partners, and Michelle Nielsen is here with me, a senior planner. We also have on our staff who is really involved in pulling together a lot of the demographic data, and our GIS analyst, Jason Barnes, who is not with us tonight, but has helped a lot and will continue to help with the housing element update. And we have been working with the city manager and the contract city planner, and we'll continue to work with them as we move through this process. Next slide, please. So the purpose of us being here tonight is really just to provide an introduction to the housing element, as I said before, and an overview of what's in it and all of the data and additional information that we include, and also collect feedback from the council and from members of the public. So we will go into housing element basics, which includes the regional housing needs allocation, which I will tell you what that is a little later. A really brief overview of some of the new state laws. There are a lot of them, and then get into some of the initial housing needs assessment, which includes looking at demographic and census data and pulling in data from other sources as well. And then we will talk about community engagement and next steps moving forward. And then we have hopefully we'll have, discussion or get some feedback, just initial feedback on the community's housing needs. Next slide, please. And next slide. So in the housing element is a mandatory element of the general plan. And California requires that all local governments adequately plan to meet the housing needs of everyone in the community through its general plan housing element. The housing element is unique in that the other elements of the general plan are typically updated on a 20-year cycle, so much longer term. And the housing element must be updated every 8 years. And that is mandated by the state, and the State Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, reviews and certifies housing elements. And the city is required to also report to HCD annually progress towards meeting the programs and goals in the housing element itself. And the state has focused a lot more recently on having jurisdictions remove regulatory barriers to housing, and it has been holding jurisdictions accountable for a lot of their programs that they commit to. Next slide, please. So the housing element is an effective housing element, really provides the necessary conditions for developing and preserving an adequate supply of housing, including affordable housing and a diversity of housing types to meet the needs of everyone in the community. It identifies opportunities and constraints to housing production, and that includes both governmental constraints, which can be things like permitting and the city's any fees associated with permitting and timelines associated with that, and then also non-governmental constraints, which can include just the cost of housing and cost of construction and land costs are some of the non-governmental constraints that are evaluated. And the housing element will establish the city's goals, policies, and programs to meet the identified need for the next 8 years. And it will include a quantification and descriptive analysis of the specific needs and resources available to address those needs. Next slide, please. So it will identify strategies and programs, and these can focus on conserving and improving existing housing, maximizing housing opportunities throughout the community, assisting in the provision of affordable housing, removing constraints, both governmental and non-governmental constraints as can be done, and then promoting fair and equal housing opportunities. Next slide, please. So a big piece of the housing element is public participation and the public process to gather feedback. We will be, with the city, conducting some stakeholder interviews through that process and incorporating input we receive throughout the process into the element and document itself. The needs assessment looks at population and demographic data and housing conditions and other available information to evaluate housing needs and project housing needs into the future. Constraints will be identified. And then this is a newer section in state law, affirmatively furthering fair housing, also known as AFFH. And this really looks at the city taking meaningful actions to foster inclusive communities that are not barriers to any of the protected classes or anyone in the community. The housing element will also include a housing sites inventory. So we'll look at vacant and underutilized sites throughout the city that are either designated for residential development or allow for residential development. And in looking at all of this information and data, and we will be then working with the city to develop goals, policies, and programs to help meet the needs of the community. Next slide, please. And I don't expect you to be able to read all this, but it's just an example of all the blue highlighting are new housing laws as of 2021. So there are many. They address a lot of different issues, from homelessness to student housing to wildfires and hazards, to accessory dwelling units and lot splits. So there are a lot of new housing laws that we will be looking at and addressing in this element update. Next slide, please. And this is just some of the highlights from the previous slide from the past few years, and looking at, like I said, accessory dwelling units, emergency and transitional housing, replacement housing, and various other related state mandates that we will be incorporating into the element update itself. Next slide, please. Great. The regional housing needs allocation, RHNA, as is also called, is intended to show that the city has the capacity in residentially designated lands to accommodate housing development, not necessarily that it will be built during the housing element cycle, but that it has the capacity for that housing. And the Department of Housing and Community Development pulls data from various sources and gives the county an allocation, a RHNA allocation, and then they also allocate that out to all of the cities within the county. Next slide, please. And for this cycle, the county is actually the lowest that I've ever seen, was allocated 20 units, and so each of the cities was allocated two of those units. Next slide, please. And this just shows, it is a fewer number than the prior housing element cycle, but that doesn't necessarily mean the need is not there. And the city will be developing programs and analyzing the need based on other data sources as well. Next slide, please. And I am going to pass it over to Michelle now, and she is going to just provide an overview of some of the data that we have collected and gathered so far. And I just want to reiterate, this is our initial take at gathering a lot of the information. And so we are looking for, input and other data sources and other things that people feel like should be incorporated into the housing element. And Michelle, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Vanessa. Good evening, everybody. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Make sure we can still move these slides. It wants me to click a little more closely. So yeah, just like Vanessa said, this slide presents kind of the overview of the content that you'll see in a housing needs assessment. Identifying housing needs through population trends, household income, special needs, that would be folks who may be experiencing a disability or disabilities, special needs, housing characteristics and conditions, the condition of the existing housing stock, housing constraints, like we were talking about, then housing resources and opportunities. Resources can be through the state programs, kind of a summary overview of the funding that's available and opportunities that may be available. That could look like underutilized properties that could be redeveloped and developed into housing. So, just to keep moving along here, so population by age group. This is from the census data. As you can see, there's been a change in the population of folks who retirement age or maybe seniors. Don't want to offend anybody here. Has been increasing, but there's also been a decline in folks that are typically seen as in their prime working years from 2010 to 2020. So this slide shows the population changes for Mount Shasta, the presented for a 20-year span. There's been a decrease of 0.12% from 2020 to 2010. But more recently, the last 10 years, the decline hasn't been as much as shown on the right. The state's projections that they prepare indicate that it's anticipated that the population in Mount Shasta will continue to decline. So this presents information on median income for the Mount Shasta area. And so you can, over time from 2010 to 2020 for a household of 4, which is the blue line, there's been a slight increase. But for individuals, there has been a decrease is what that orange line is showing. And then the table gets a little bit more granular that shows when you sum up those numbers, folks who are extremely low, very low, or low income, they make up nearly 51% of the households in the city of Mount Shasta. And there's a very small group by percentage that are moderate income. That's folks who earn between 80 to 120% of the median income. And the median income is just over $48,000. But there's a large group that's above moderate. They're earning 120% or more of the median income. So by industry, this slide is showing the estimated number of people, that's your first column, that are in these industry, and then a percentage. The median income data that is presented, just so everybody knows, is for the North Valley region. So which is, Colusa, Glen, Lassen, Modoc, Nevada, Plumas, Sierra, Siskiyou, and Tehama, and Trinity County. So that's pretty. They didn't have very granular data that was even just Siskiyou specific. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at that median income data. But the value that's highlighted for a single is this data is indicating that there's only this one broad employment category that actually earns enough to be able to afford what the current median value median home prices, which I'll show in a second here. So, so that would mean that most folks, you need two incomes to be able to buy a median income price house in the Mount Shasta community. So this is showing that data, as you can see from. And this is just Siskiyou County. This is not Mount Shasta, and, which indicates that the median home prices are higher in Mount Shasta. But obviously, there's been, for Siskiyou County overall, there's been a pretty big increase in the sales prices from 2020 to 2022. So the median income, which to buy that house is at least $85,000, using pretty standard metrics, the 20% down payment, the property taxes, and insurance. It's all presented on the slide here. So the home prices across the state, as I'm sure a lot of folks in the meeting tonight are aware of, have been increasing a lot. And in fact, Siskiyou County was second behind Santa Barbara County in terms of the largest amount of gain in the median price from 2021 to 2022. So that's pretty remarkable. And then, but also, this data is from the California Association of Realtors, that there's also been a pretty sharp decline in housing sales recently in Mount Shasta, in Siskiyou County overall. So again, this is at the county level. Mount Shasta might be a little bit more unique than what we're seeing here, but this does give you definitely a flavor of what's going on with housing overall, of how expensive it is, and also looking at the income. So this is more specific data for Mount Shasta that shows the median home price, the change in values from 2018 to 2022. And also note what the cost burden households. The percentages here are fairly high. What this means is 53% of the total households in Mount Shasta are cost burden. That means they are paying more than 30% of their income towards their housing. And then when you get to folks that are low income, very low income, or extremely low income, nearly 80% of those folks are cost burden. In terms of housing mix, you guys probably all recognize this because you live there, but just kind of this pie chart summarizes the data. Most of the housing units are detached. There's a small population of mobile homes and single family attached. And then there's 21% that are 2 to 4, and 12% that are 5 or more units. And then this data is showing the tenure of the houses. Are there rentals, or are the houses being rented, or are they owner occupied? So this is interesting. From 2010 to 2020, the total number of units increased by 5%. The number that are owner occupied increased by 1%, but there's a huge increase of the number that were renter occupied in terms as a percentage of the overall. So that's some interesting data. And then in terms of vacancy, just using census data, not too many changes here, but the number of households and the vacancies, it looks, based on this data, it looks like the vacancy rate in 2010 was 12.19, and then more recently 12.8 of the total housing units. And then starting to dip our toes a little bit into special population, special needs of the older segment of the population. As we talked about earlier, was a pretty significant increase in the number of folks in Mount Shasta who are 55 to 64 and 65 to 74 years old from the time span of 2000 to 2020. With the number from 2000 to 2020, the total population nearly doubled, with the 55 to 64 age group seeing the biggest increase at 136%. Excuse me. So a state law requires us to do, for jurisdictions to look at the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness. As part of that data, we look at what are point in time counts that are done by in Siskiyou County, the Department of Public Health, in partnership with the Continuum of Care, does that. And most recently, it was done in 2021. The point in time count conducted in 2021, they did only count people who were in shelters. It did not go out and count folks who were unsheltered, who might be living in a camp. This was due to COVID. I did find a 2017 study that estimated, it was more specific and focused on Mount Shasta, that estimated at that point in time there was about 12 to 20 persons experiencing homelessness in Mount Shasta. But that would certainly be a data point where there might be members of the community who might be able to fill in and give us more specific data that's unique to Mount Shasta. Excuse me. So how do we meet housing needs? The strategies, it's usually it's a multi-pronged approach because of the complexity of the issues. You got market forces, you got folks who where a wide range of the income spectrum. So it's usually typically a multi-pronged approach, and it's a multiple things. It can span multiple years to accomplish, improving the housing for the community. So these are just some samples. I think Vanessa summarized these. So updating the regulations to meet state requirements, that's definitely something that has to be done. The HCD definitely checks for that closely in their review. Support of workforce housing development. So housing that for people who, teachers, firefighters, people who work for the city, that they so they can live in the community and closer to where they work. Identifying additional housing sites, rezone to higher densities, and so forth. So like Vanessa talked about, there's this new part of state law Vanessa talked about. There's this new part of state law called affirmatively furthering fair housing. And part of what it's looking at is areas of opportunity and typically areas where there's more positive outcome based on indicators for, economics, environmental, and education. And Mount Shasta is mostly highest resource. That's a big positive. The lighter blue color that you see is high resource. The brown color is there's not any data, unfortunately. So either tonight or going forward, we would love to have public, the city council, other organizations maybe help fill in that missing insufficient data area, which it's my understanding is around the hospital. It does part of affirmatively furthering fair housing does look at if areas have areas of concentrated racial and ethnic segregation, and segregation is used in this regulatory context is where there's concentration is what is meant. And Mount Shasta doesn't have those areas. So community engagement, next step, well, we're here tonight doing the community workshop. Excuse me, take a sip of water here. We're going to launch on doing stakeholder outreach. This will be followed by drafting the document and whatnot, and then there'll be planning commission, city council review, planning a public hearing with the planning commission and also with the city council. This next slide kind of lays it out a little bit better. Let's do this. So here we are, kind of at let me get my pointer here. Second, here we are, this stage where we've started doing this work here, where we're reviewing and assessing the available data. And like Vanessa said, we welcome input on like other stuff, information we can look at. And very importantly, getting the public input, whether it's tonight or if you send an email and what have you, or write a letter. So we also have to, state law requires us to evaluate how the implementation of the city's previous housing element, how many programs got accomplished and the status of those. It's pretty normal for jurisdictions to carry programs forward, either because they're still working on them, maybe they weren't able to get to them, maybe they want to tweak it a little bit for this next cycle. Goals, policies and programs and specific performance measures, essentially KPIs is what the state's looking for on your implementation of your housing element and the inventory of sites. And then all while drafting that housing element. So they're looking at meetings with the city, with the planning commission and city council in October and November, and then that will be followed by some hearings with the city council, and then to get their authorization for it to be submitted to the state for review. And they have a 90-day review period, and then they'll provide some comments on it, and at that point, make revisions, go back to the planning commission, the city council, and adoption, and then certification with the state. So that's it in a nutshell. Let me change my cursor here. A second. Okay. All right. So we would like to open up the meeting at the pleasure of the council through the chair for questions and discussion, and maybe to help get that going, we have a couple of ones to start everybody off, if that would be helpful. So,
Councilors, any questions?
Yeah, to the chair.
Yeah.
One part that stood out to me, so there, well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. It's very thorough. One part stated that the median income in Mount Shasta, or the majority of the median income, was 58,000 and over. And then following that slide was stating that it's needed about 85,000 per household to buy a house. So what I'm asking is whether there's data available to kind of line those two things up a little more and compare apples to apples, so we know how much over that 58,000 of median income is, so we can get a better idea of how far out of whack we are. But comparing those two amounts, it's hard for me to tell if we are. I'm assuming we're out of whack, but I think more info is needed on that. If that makes sense.
Through the chair, if I may. So if I understand, I heard the council member's question correctly. So I think I heard, how to reconcile this slide that shows the median income using, it is 2018 HUD data, and then how to, so kind of jumping through the industry to this value here, where there's a differential of nearly $40,000, if my math is not quite that much, but $30,000 to $40,000. Things that could be done is through market conditions is setting the table to improve opportunities for construction of housing. That could be done by implementing, making assistance more readily available for a new state law called SB 9, which allows ministerial lot splits for qualifying parcels, provide more enhanced technical assistance, because that's kind of lay property owners would implement. Making it easier to develop condos, townhouses, taking steps to make it increasing the supply. And then on the employment opportunities as well. Housing elements don't get to that quite so much, but that's, employment, economic development is obviously a factor here. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
Well, my question is, of the 58, or I'm rounding, but the 58,000 or higher, I don't know how high that goes. So I guess my question is, are we comparing the median income of 58,000 to 85,000 of what's needed, or is it more real? Are they more on the same level and we just don't have that data? The or higher is where I'm getting hung up. I guess I don't. It says 58,000, yeah, or greater is where most of our people lay. So I don't, yeah. We're 40.
So the difference between that, this tops out at almost 58,000, but there's still another, we can see what other data there might be.
Okay.
That might, sorry.
Perfect.
For.
No, that's okay. Sorry, I'm probably doing a horrible job at my question, but yes, that's what I'm referring to. Thank you.
Anybody else?
Well, my commentary is not to the presenters, who have done a very good job at presenting the data. I look forward to more analysis and ideas from them, but on the surface, it just appears to me that we need to simultaneously improve our income and the jobs that we have and the income that they produce for people, so that people can afford housing, market housing, et cetera. Since that's really hard to do quickly, we just have a lot of folks that can't afford to buy houses, so that leads to the question of how much subsidized housing is needed. And I think the presenters will probably come up with some ideas and points on that as they go along. But the reality is that we have two problems with respect to affordability of housing, and I think the housing situation is actually, given that there's probably some monies available, it's probably a little easier to fix. Generating jobs that pay higher is a whole nother issue. So, yeah, got a lot of work cut out for ourselves here. And I think this presentation has proven that on both points. Need more and better jobs and more housing at for all income levels. Just a commentary. Thank you.
Michelle, if I may jump in here for a second, can we get a copy of this presentation? Maybe we did and I just missed it because I'm on the road. Is that something we can do?
Yes, we have provided it to the city manager, and we were late on getting it to him, so we apologize for that, but yes, you will be provided a copy.
It's still coming over the Rockies, trying to catch me.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. And first of all, and any other questions, councilors, before we turn it over to the public?
Yes, thank you. Vanessa and Michelle, thank you for a very good presentation. This is, as I understand, basically an update of our existing housing element to comply with not only housing needs, but changes in law that have occurred since the implementation of our existing housing element, correct?
Yes.
Yes, that is correct. Oh.
Okay. And you're probably aware of this, but at the present time, there is a proposed 25-unit affordable complex moving forward in the city. In addition, we at local level have been discussing the possibility for I think quite a large number of houses or housing and housing types for the east side of what we used to call the Roseburg property, now called the Landing. That's about 35 acres that can be developed there. That might be a city-owned property that might be available for a mixture of housing types and income levels. You're probably aware of that too.
I've heard of it, but we are definitely we will look into that more, and I appreciate the input and get more information about that.
Great, thank you.
John, anything from?
At a later date.
At a later date, okay. Kathy, can we turn this over to for public input? And
Sure. Our first speaker will be Peggy Risch.
Thank you.
Okay, my name's Peggy Risch, and thank you for the presentation. It was really good. Since I've been a long-term resident of Mount Shasta, I actually participated with the previous consultants on the prior housing element, so I'm very familiar with what was in there. And I just want to bring to your attention that the city of Mount Shasta has an abundance of land that is already zoned residential that is available. It's an amazingly high number. And what I would think that would really benefit our community is to looking at creative ways of land trust to actually get home ownership into more those income levels, which are now kind of out of the market to be able to be homeowners. So I would like to see in the housing element some discussion about these creative ways, including community land trusts for home ownership. I know that many of us who moved to Mount Shasta came here not to be densified and living on top of each other. So my preference would be to look at other means and opportunities that do not push us and crowd us into one another. And this is possible because of this abundance of land that is undeveloped, already existing. One of my final comments at this time is that having participated in the prior housing element, the timeline for completion and actually getting public input seems really compressed. And so I'm wondering if there's any way in which that can be kind of stretched out a little bit, and that maybe some energy and time, money can be utilized to promote this in a lot of different ways to get more community involvement. I do want to stress that basically the regional housing needs assessment for Mount Shasta is basically 2. And one's very low and one's low. And we all know that there are others who actually are wanting to live here, actually rent here. Not everybody wants to own property. And that I'd like to see, how do we reduce the higher number of vacancies in homes that exist here? Why is that? Why is there a 20% vacant in Mount Shasta? And on the tail end of that, I would like to see included, how is short-term rentals, vacation rentals, especially those that are commercially operated, how are they affecting the housing needs in Mount Shasta? Because I didn't see any mention of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Kathy, who's next?
We don't have any other hands raised online. Are there any members of the audience that would like to speak on this? No, that is all public comment.
Through the chair, I have one more question, if I may, for clarification with Vanessa and Michelle.
Sure.
What is the timing for the public engagement with the community, and how many meetings do you anticipate having, and in what form?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is a good point that the timing has been compressed just due to HCD's schedule and some other things. And the housing element needs to be certified by the state, well, with it by February, but then they do give a little leeway. So it has to be 120 days after February 15th is kind of the drop dead deadline for certification. And as Michelle mentioned, you know, there is a 90-day HCD review period prior to them certifying it. So we will revisit our public outreach schedule and look at that and work with the city to get as much, you know, outreach and public input and engagement as we can.
Do you have some idea of what means, whether it's going to be in person, whether it's going to be by Zoom, and how many sessions you might have? Previously, we had talked about having, the city council had previously talked about having a couple of community outreach meetings. So
Yeah, and so this was one of them, and then we were, I believe, you know, in our original scope, we had one more community meeting that could be either in person or Zoom or a hybrid, depending on, you know, city desires. And then we can also work with city staff to see how we can do more. We also will be doing some stakeholder interviews, so we will be doing some of that direct interview and outreach as well.
thank you for that clarification.
Well, thank you all for the the presentation. I'd like to encourage anybody who's watching, please send in emails, call us, email us, give us your feedback on what you'd like to see happen, not happen. And as I think I'm getting the sense of it, you need to do this relatively quickly. Again, thank you all. And with that, Kathy, there's nobody else who wants to speak in the audience, I'm assuming?
There is not.
Then we will move on to agenda item number 10, the proposal to share a city planner with Weed and to increase the salary. City Manager, would you introduce this? And because I've gotten a number of comments and questions about this, to the extent you feel comfortable, would you also talk about how a grant writer might fit into this situation?
Sure. So first off, speaking to a number of colleagues and planners that I know in the area, what I was trying to do is come up with a salary range where we can go out for a full-time planner position that will be competitive, as opposed to right now we're in a position that most likely all we're going to attract is somebody that's right out of planning school. And the consensus has been if we raise the range across the board by about $8,000, with the high end being $75,000, that we can find somebody with 4 or 5 years of experience. To get somebody with extensive experience, we're talking about an increase to about $92,000. At the same time, I learned that Tim Rundell, the city manager in Weed, is looking for some planning services. He was using a contract planner, Rico Tinsman, for about 10 hours a week, and we talked about the idea of potentially sharing time between the two cities. Now, I talked to the city manager late last week, and he is now saying that they have a company called PlaceWorks on and doing much of their work, so they don't necessarily need 25%. It would be considerably less. But my proposal is that we would share resources with Weed as time permits, and our contract would be with the planner. We would pay everything up front, and the contract would then stipulate that Weed reimburses us monthly for the services that they use, not to exceed 25%. And it's been made clear by Weed city manager that we, in most situations, they wouldn't need nearly that amount of time. Just items that need immediate responses, of a very local nature, and and again needing that quick response. So.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilors, any questions?
To the chair?
Yeah.
So there's no one in particular, Weed doesn't have a city planner already. This is a plan to go out and recruit or find someone and then share.
So to be clear, they have a contract planner on staff, and they were going to continue, not the same one. They've contracted with PlaceWorks. They're not in the area, and they're happy with their work. There just are a couple projects that come up where they're not as responsive to local needs as he would like, and in those instances, he could use a little bit of assistance. So, I anticipate that a planner that we would hire for Mount Shasta, we would get the vast majority of their time. And it would be, that time for extended to Weed would be dependent upon the availability of the planner, with the focus on Mount Shasta work first.
So then the plan is just to open it up as a job description and perhaps raise the rates if that happens tonight. If we were to go recruit, would the city of Weed pay for a quarter of those costs?
So we would, what we would do is we would pay for 100% of the cost of the employee. The contract, as I've talked to John Kenny about this, would then have, this is the easiest and cleanest way to do this, is have then Weed reimburse us monthly for the amount of time that they used. Okay. That includes the all-in rate, not just the hourly rate for that person.
Got it. Thank you.
Councilors?
Doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Okay, let's open it up for public comment. Kathy, we have anybody online or in the audience?
We do. Our first speaker will be Betty Krieger.
Hi, all.
Hi, Betty.
I agree that we need to pay the city planner another 10 grand or so. However, I disagree that we should consider sharing that person with Weed. All the past city planners in the 11 years that I've lived here in Mount Shasta have had more than enough to do. And speaking in particular to the last two city planners, I know their plates were overflowing, at times not even having enough time to get it all done, such as the ability to timely provide information to new applicants. So in my opinion, that sharing with Weed also might involve competing interests for new projects. As the city manager said, they will only want our planner if they have projects that they can't handle. Well, what if the projects they can't handle are more than we are prepared to let them handle, given the fact that our city planner has enough on their plate? And I think that since we have a budget surplus, why would we want to create a situation that could create conflicts of interest in getting Mount Shasta projects completed? I think we should, or maybe you, not me, you should think carefully before agreeing to such a deal. We don't know. I mean, there's so many ifs, ands, and buts about this. He mentioned, the city manager mentioned resources as time permits. Well, what if time doesn't permit? I can see some arguments taking place between the city of Mount Shasta and the city of Weed over this. And could you please define what associated cost means? Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Kathy, anybody else online?
Yes, our next speaker will be Peggy Risch.
Peggy Risch. I tend to say that I think this is a bad idea for multiple reasons. Betty has pointed out several of the potential downsides, let's call it, of sharing a planner with Weed. Personally, why do we need a contract with Weed if it's going to be about our availability? Why not pick up the phone, give a call and say, hey, do you got any time over there that you can lend us? Because I can bet you that based on the last 2 decades that I've lived here, we've only had one person in the planning department. One. And now to assume that that person could take on, at times, another city with all of their specific regulations, their codes, their zoning, their ordinances to come up to date and to actually be able to do a good job, that just seems ridiculous to me. What would happen to the quality of work for Mount Shasta? Is it going to leave Mount Shasta more liable because the work is less timely so that the deadlines that are in our code of regulations for our dealing with applications don't get done. If anything, I would like to see more money given to this department in order to get not only a good planner, and actually I think a new graduate who has California current law information. Our last planner came from out of state. I think that was part of the problem there. But I think a new grad is not necessarily a bad thing. But why not extend our planning department so that they can actually function really optimal instead of overburden them? Now, someone mentioned, Jeffrey did, about a grant, and I'll just say this about grant writing because I've assisted the grants that were filled for some of the environmental groups that I have worked with. And you need somebody who has boots on the ground in your community to write those grants, because the city is responsible for the deliverables and the timelines of that. And so I would really hesitate to recommend putting a grant writer outside who doesn't know our community, and therefore package our planning department who has the time and the skills to do a complete job, and don't share with another town. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy. Kathy?
Yes, our next speaker will be Johanna.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Johanna. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, you know what what I'm missing on all of this is the little icon that says you can unmute. So usually I get that and I wasn't getting it. So sorry, different process. Good evening again. So I would just like to say that I agree with what Betty and Peggy have said on this. I do think a higher salary would be a good thing. And I just want to also point out that, the sharing, it just seems to be a really slippery slope, because, how are you going to determine what the limits are? Are there going to be weekly or monthly time limits on this? Because one project for weed could take over at a certain time that might be critical for Mount Shasta to meet other deliverables, and who's going to set those boundaries? So Shasta will lose those resources, but then who supervises this? And then how is this adequately documented? And yeah, it just seems like this could be ripe for problems. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanna. Kathy?
Thank you, Mayor. We do not have any other remote commenters. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this? No. There's no more public comment.
Thank you. Let's bring it back to council. Questions, comments?
Through the chair.
Yes.
I'd like to hear the city manager's comments regarding the sharing idea. Would that be based upon availability? In other words, depending upon what is happening here in Mount Shasta, number one, and then number two, any ideas about the possibility of bringing in one or more interns to assist with the planner?
So there are a couple pieces to the first part of that question. I'm all for having a full-time planner, to ourselves. Part of this is just a way to defray some of the cost. To do this, if we were to write a contract, we would write in the maximum amount of time per week that up to a certain amount, and we would write that into the agreement. One of the things we would also write into the agreement is, if it isn't working, a termination clause that says with 30 days notice that either party can back out because clearly our needs aren't being met, or weeds needs aren't being met. And so the other piece of this is, this may not work, but I'm looking at the time that was spent with the last, tenured full-time planner, and a lot of, Miss Lucchese, a lot of her work was spent in grant writing. And my thinking is to supplement this, this position, if we are allowing Weed to use the time of this planner as we bring somebody in at a less expensive rate to do some grant writing. But there was a great comment made about, when writing grants, it's better to have somebody that's here and knows the community. And I imagine there are grant writers here that do know the community, but then it gets down to the type of grant, and are they experts in that field, and you need that expertise to be able to write a specific grant. I'm thinking particularly transportation and drainage, anything related to public works. I mean, you really have to have an understanding of AR needs, but also the technical aspects of completing those applications. And you had a second part of that question?
There was concern about the planner not having enough time and perhaps being exacerbated by sharing a planner. Would those concerns potentially be mitigated by having one or more planning interns from one of the graduate schools?
Potentially. I am really hesitant to use interns, and my reasoning behind this is, a lot of experience in long-range planning is when you bring in an intern, you spend an awful lot of time bringing an intern up to speed, and where you can't do your work and you're babysitting, unless you can park that intern on one specific task, teach them one time and let them go. In that case, it can work, but as somebody that's going to be able to provide significant amount of additional bandwidth, that's a limited response.
Councilors?
As far as sharing the planning commission, the planning department goes, I'm not really opposed to that with all the clauses and termination clauses that Todd has mentioned. We're is to the commenters talking about the planner having enough time to get stuff done. Maybe the idea of an intern to just deal with all the emails that hold up the planner from said speakers and other members of town, constantly badgering them with questions every day. That might actually help free up the planner a little bit. Either an intern or a lot less emails. That's really what bothered Juliana Lucchese when I first got on council talking to her. Half her day was answering emails from the same 5 people. So maybe if that's a little less, then things might actually get done.
Tessa? John?
Yeah, to the chair. I do like the 30-day clause. So if someone's not happy, we can refigure this. I also think it's a nice approach to afford someone that we can't afford. So seems like a nice compromise to me.
John?
Well, I'm in favor of the $10,000 adjustment in income outright. A little tentative about sharing the planner for a host of reasons. So that's where I stand right now. So I would motion in favor of number 2 that's on the list here.
Well,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, we'd like to hear from you too.
Well, it's always a pleasure to hear members of the community speak up and give input for us to chew on, because frequently it's got good value. The initial plan of the 75-25 split was trying to defray some of the costs because we, and Betty, I don't mean to be blunt about this, but we do not have a budget surplus. When we started out 100 grand in the hole, we have a significant reserve, but our budget is started out negative, and this will take it more in that direction. And we passed some recent salary increases that have taken it more in that direction. So our city manager was being responsible, trying to figure out getting a higher quality person who might be able to also get more done, and potentially defray some of that work with a grant writer. Although the 75-25 isn't going to happen, and it looks like we're just going to, it's going to be up 90-10 or 95-5, and then that starts to get into the, Todd, I don't know why in that situation we really want to share and run into some potential problems. There may be reasons I just don't see them quite so well. And that maybe grant writing should be done in-house by the planner. And that's about all I've got to say, unless, Tim, you were going to ask another question or comment.
Previously, I had just asked city manager questions, but I haven't commented on the proposal. Commenting on the proposal, I would be supportive of the city manager's recommendation that we increase the salary for the planner. And I'd be supportive of our city manager's recommendation to entering into a contract with Weed along the lines that he's discussed and presented to us. He is the CEO when it comes to administering the city and city personnel. And this is his recommendations. I'd like to be able to support him on it.
Was that a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much.
Was that unanimous?
That was unanimous.
Okay.
Agenda item number 11. Warren McKenzie, thank you for hanging in there. This is the proposed vacation of a half of a block-long segment of Field Street relative to the Danco project. And again, City Manager, would you introduce this to us?
Yes. So there is a 25-unit affordable housing complex on the proposed on the block bounded by Field, Ivy, and Chestnut, and then Alder Avenue on the north side. So in putting the resolution and the staff report together, I got a little rushed, and some of the nuances were missed when I put this together. Essentially, what we're looking for is a conditioned approval for vacating half of Field Street where the width of that roadway is 80 feet, and taking 40 feet of that for use as part of this affordable housing project, contingent upon, this would, so this is, if council moves in this direction, the idea is it gives Danco certainty that they should continue looking at the site, because if not, they may end up moving to a different location and starting again from scratch. We also know that before we could actually vacate the street, that we'd need to go through the CEQA process. Tom Hesseldins is here to talk briefly on why we need this additional 40 feet as part of this project, and I'll turn it over to him. But again, this is just getting direction from council. We didn't even need to come back with a resolution that's adjusted. It's just knowing, having certainty from council that the idea of vacating field as part of an overall project that is subject to CEQA review is something that you'd support.
Okay, Tom, I don't see him.
He's present.
We do.
He's present.
Oh, hi, there you are, Tom.
Hi, Jeffrey, and everybody else. The drawing that's up, you can see how one of the units extends about 9 feet into the right-of-way, and it's shown with crisscross hatching the 40-foot portion of the 80-foot right-of-way that is proposed for vacating. I'm the one that suggested this to Danco and then to the city initially, based on seeing how squeezed the site was before doing that, because they had that unit held back 5 feet from the actual property line. They had units up against the interior parking that you can see there. They were lacking one of the sidewalks along one side of the parking, and it was just too squeezed. You need the sidewalks both sides on the parking because car bumpers overhang curbs, and in one case it was right up against a building. Also, I was trying to accommodate snow storage and drainage on the whole site, and with it that squeezed, it wasn't working very well. So by moving that building closest to Field Street over 9 feet into the right-of-way, I was able to space everything out and make the whole site work. The moving of the building closer to that stream that you see in the middle does not require filling any wetlands. And there's an existing gravel road that accesses a rental house up on the Brown property to the top of the screen. And that gravel road is unaffected by vacating half of the street. There are certainly questions remaining about a property owner on the other side, Phillips, and then you've got Brown at the top. It's interesting that Field Street had continued further and had been vacated in the past. And development is such that with Kenneth and Marjorie up at the top and along Ivy Street and along East Hinckley Street, there's an open space that Brown and Phillips own that's boxed in all the way around. So it doesn't appear that you would need an 80-foot right-of-way into the future. 40-foot would seem to be more than enough. There is a large city sewer line running through there and a city water line. The city would need to hold back an easement. It uses that gravel road for access, for management up there, for manhole access and valves. So those all need to be considered. And at this juncture, it wasn't, I should point out, Danco hired me as the landscape architect to help them with this project. So I was suggesting to them that we ask the city's thoughts about the feasibility of this, and if it does appear feasible, then to move ahead with designs that include that. And we also have to consider wetlands. There's a very small amount, but nonetheless it needs to be considered. And the Danco is planning to go through a CEQA process associated with this project. So it was understood by Danco that the vacating of that portion of Field Street would not be finalized until CEQA was completed, and we heard from the community. So that's where it stands now, and I just wanted to explain the details of why vacating half of that right-of-way would help the project. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure.
Through the chair?
Yeah, please.
So, Tom, what I understand is 80-foot right-of-way, that's quite a wide road that's, that if the city council were to give conditional approval to abandoning the right-of-way for 40 of that 80 feet, there would still remain an easement. We'd have an easement agreement for the utilities. It would not adversely affect public safety, correct?
No, I don't think so. And you've got the drainage running there through there too, and I should have mentioned that the city would retain an easement for drainage as well. And I'm not proposing to Danco that they do any developing on the rest of that 40 feet that would be vacated, but I am proposing that it be restored. There's a lot of Himalayan blackberries in there. It's a nice little stream running through it. Tiny stream, but nonetheless. And so it would become part of the overall landscaping. But the main thing was to be able to move the buildings and the internal parking to make this thing work.
And we're talking about something like 9 feet, is that?
The actual building encroachment that you can see there is about 9 feet into the right-of-way.
Okay. Thank you.
I went for the 40 feet just simply because the standard city approach with vacating unbuilt streets was to split it down the center, and 40 or half would go to each adjoining landowner. So, and seeing in this case that did not go over to the existing gravel road, and then what's left, you can see down at the bottom of that drawing, the dashed lines. What's left lines up with the existing portion of Field Street that is paved that connects over to North Mount Shasta Boulevard. Thanks, Tim. Anybody else?
Tessa?
Nope.
John and John?
Straightforward.
Do I hear a motion then?
Comment.
If there's anyone in the remote audience that would like to make public comment on this item, please raise your hand.
I was trying to jump the gun there. Sorry about that.
Okay, it doesn't appear we have, Peggy Risch.
So I didn't submit any public comments on this, but I'm aware that some comments were submitted to the city council. Basically, that any action that you would make today, whether it's conditional or whether it's with that resolution, is actually a violation of the California Environmental Quality Act in terms of your piecemealing. You're jumping the gun. You're putting basically the cart before the horse. And I think you have comments in much more detail that I don't need to go into right now. So my suggestion is that, as Tom said in his comments, it was about a discussion, and that actually at this point, in order to avoid this piecemealing potential violation of CEQA, that you just not make a motion of any sort at this time. I think your views have been expressed, and I think that would give the developer Danco an opportunity to move this design into a CEQA document and to let it go through the process where basically the cart is there and the horse is before the cart, not the other way around, which is if you make any motion tonight of any kind, conditional or not. So that's my comments, and just trying to keep everything tidy here.
Thank you, Peggy. Anybody else out?
We don't have any other online hands raised.
Anybody in house?
No public comment. No more public comment.
Thank you. Does anybody feel qualified, city manager, Tom Hesseldens, to address or at least help round out my understanding
Yes.
what piecemealing is and why Peggy thinks this would be illegal?
She's flat out wrong on this issue. If you pass a resolution tonight, or you don't, if you passed a resolution and said that the vacation was contingent upon the entire project being reviewed by CEQA before that vacation happened, there is no CEQA issue. The other is if we heard from city council and they said, okay, we're in support of the notion of vacating the street, that gives Danco some surety to move forward and continue the entitlement process, that would suffice as well. But it's not piecemealing.
So if I understand correctly, we can give our sense of, basically give Danco and city staff a sense of our pulse without taking any action to formally approve or not the abandoning of 40 feet. And with that, let me indicate that I would, my pulse is to be supportive of the proposal if and when this project goes through CEQA.
I agree.
Tessa, help me understand what you agreed to.
I think what Councilman Stearns is suggesting is that we don't need to take formal action. We can just give a thumbs up and they can continue on with our support. So I agree with that.
John and John?
You're all for the resolution? Either or. Okay. So does Danco think that this is a critical item to their I mean, why is this here?
Yes.
They do?
Yes.
How so?
In terms of fitting the number of units that they have proposed on site.
Okay, so the architectural plan that Hesselden's is presenting here, so we're approving that, then SEQA reviews it? Is that the idea? Then you go through a SEQA review? Or, I mean,
no,
there seems to be an order of operation issue with some people. I'm not sure.
So no, it's this. So it's to fit the number of units that Danco would like on the site, and it's also to ensure that we have additional space for residents on the site as well, and to avoid those wetlands. It's again, there has been discussion that if we are not able to get at least a tacit commitment that council is on board for this vacation when the time comes, that they may end up having to consider another location and start from scratch. So we're just really looking for direction tonight, it sounds like, from council that we're giving some surety to Danco that if they move forward, they make it through the CEQA process, that the vacation would happen.
But a formal resolution isn't vital, is what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
Let me ask one last question. Mackenzie is online. Would you like to add anything to this conversation? You don't have to.
Thank you so much. No, I appreciate it, and thank you all for hearing this item tonight. We're excited about this project. We've already been with this same site for about since 2013, and we're kind of revisiting it right now. We've been working really closely with the city and with Tom and with our architects, Kaluja Architects, to really massage the site plan and get it to work best for the site itself. And we've spent, I would say a couple of months now massaging the site plan, getting all of our studies done for the CEQA process and figuring out what the best layout for the project is. And so, yeah, this is just a step for us to, like Todd said, just to kind of understand how you're feeling about the project. We recognize that it hasn't been presented to you formally yet, but with all the work that we've done and how far we've come, just kind of getting an idea that will be received well, and that this vacation will help the project site, like Todd said. We're looking to do 25 units of family housing. And this area that would be vacated would be kept more of kind of like a natural space and would be maintained in a good way. So if there's any other specific questions, please let me know.
Yeah, so we have this formal city council resolution to either vote on or not. And the question is, do you feel it's critical that this formal resolution be attended to and hopefully passed? Or do you just need a nod of approval, an informal nod of approval?
I can weigh in on that. If you were, so remember my statement at the beginning that this resolution was written in such a way, it's my fault, that it didn't take into account that any approval to vacate this would be contingent upon getting us through the CEQA process. So we can't pass the resolution as written. It was a mistake on my part, but we could pass a resolution if so desired that was contingent upon making our way through the CEQA process, and if so approved, then vacation. But just giving Danco surety that that the vacation is something that you as a body are on board with is enough.
Mackenzie, I'm looking for a nod.
So Mackenzie, have you gotten a sense of the pulse of the city council to feel some assurance and reassurance in continuing to move forward with this lovely project?
Yes, I feel good about it. Thank you so much. And I think that, Todd, we might come back for a formal resolution at some other point in the future, correct? But it doesn't have to be today, and it can't be today from what Todd just said. So, but we will be back. We'll be coming back to present the project in the next few months once we get all of our studies complete and completed, lined out. So.
Thank you. I should also add that I'm in alignment with the rest of the council, so you have a across the board from every person on the council. And anybody else want any further comment on that? Well, then, again, thank you, Mackenzie, for hanging in here to the end of this meeting. We will look forward to you coming back. And then, so we've already handled agenda item number 12. We're going to move to, I guess we should finish with 11 in a way that we're not going to take any action, formal action on this. Is that what I'm hearing from the council?
Correct.
Okay. Then we will move to agenda item number 13, there were no outside meetings. Number 14, future agenda items and meetings. Anybody want to add anything?
I don't see anyone affirmatively nodding.
That's a big no.
Well, thank you very much. We have arrived at that wonderful hour where we are at agenda item 15, and we are, go Tessa. We're adjourned. Thank you very much.
No.
Hey, and Tessa.
Yes, sir.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but